Michelle Michaud, and I'm an attorney and a mediator. I've been an attorney for 10 years now. So my background was in corporate kind of business law, securities law. So the first 5 years kind of follow the economic growth pattern of the past decade. So that part of my job was pretty fun. We created transactions and helped with financing, and there was a lot of growth. So it felt like you were part of putting great ideas together. I enjoyed that part of the law. The shift began to happen as the economy began to collapse, and as the economy collapsed, all those deals that we had put together, started to collapse, and so no longer was it about corporations succeeding. You could start to see the people underneath and the conflict starting to evolve. Right about that time, I ended up I went from being in-house counsel at one of these corporations to working in one of the largest law firms here in Idaho. And in that transition, it was in the end also with the economic shift, I ended up working a lot with the bankruptcy team and helping banks essentially undo a lot of these complicated financial transactions. And it was really tough going, because as the banks were under strain, there was a need to liquidate a lot of properties. There wasn't a lot of loan modifications happening anymore. The loan to value on real estate had plummeted. So no longer was there a lot of wiggle room with borrowers, and so we were doing a lot of foreclosures on farms that had been in people's families for generation after generation, and having to make those difficult decisions and be those attorneys where you get your marching orders to do that and to walk by the herd of dairy farm cattle that are literally the bank's collateral was heartbreaking for me. Not being able to acknowledge, feeling like I couldn't acknowledge as bank counsel the people involved in the businesses, and what happens to them next. Just kind of not just feeling like a sword coming in there and carving people's lives up and then leaving. And so it started to weigh on me. I was taking a lot of it in and feeling helpless, not knowing that there were other ways to approach conflict resolution, and just feeling like I had marching orders for my client and I was doing the best I could to get kind of that zealous advocacy to get the job done that I was instructed to do. But it was causing a lot of friction within me as a human. And on the eve of Christmas Eve, this is the last year that I was at the firm, I was sent to a creditors meeting with the bankruptcy court. And at that time, bankruptcy court, it was just flooded. I mean, there were probably 50 different people in there. And the debtor that I was going to be asking questions for at the creditors meeting had brought Christmas cookies for everyone. And she had lost her house because they had signed a personal guarantee. Their business had folded, but they had signed personal guarantees, so she'd lost her house. She'd lost everything. And to see this woman in the eve of Christmas Eve with nothing left, and she's still, handing out Christmas cheer to everyone. Of course, she comes up to me and I introduce myself as, the bank's counsel, and she just smiled and handed me my plate of cookies, and on that plate of cookies is a handwritten, Merry Christmas from her 3-year-old daughter in crayon. So it was really hard for me to be bank counsel at that moment. So I, took another deep breath and, did what I had to do for my clients and did my best to try and manage, a difficult situation. But really just felt that the system is really broken. I mean, here we are at the holidays, still just trying to get the deals done and get people through it. It was a heartbreaking day for me. So I went back to the office with my plate of cookies and plopped it on the partner's desk and said, that was the worst thing I've ever had to do, and I could never do that again. And he kind of smiled and looked up at me, and he said, you shouldn't feel bad, because that bank money bought the sugar that made those cookies, I'm pretty sure. And he kind of laughed. He thought this was a great joke. And I just remember shaking my head and just thinking, there has to be a better way to get people through this system. I'm literally watching people crack, time and time again. And a lot of it was simply people still making payments on a loan. That was their requirement. They were still making good on those payments, but when the real estate values plummeted, banks started pulling loans for the loan to value. And that just didn't feel fair to me. And so I was having a hard time finding each morning, to get up and kind of take another person's dream apart without recognizing the catastrophic effects that it has on people, our community. So trying to practice law is learning, for me, it was quickly becoming, I was getting blindsided because as a typical lawyer, and what I had thought my role was up until recently was just to focus on the law. And the part that was escaping me was the dance, and within every conflict, within every difficult situation, the law is only a fraction. And not only is there a legal component, but there's a huge emotional component, and financial concerns. And that dance between those three elements, to me, I was missing the dance. I was trained as a lawyer, I was surrounded by other lawyers, and kind of in a society where I thought all I was allowed to do was look at that legal piece. But as a human, intuitively picking up on the other two pieces, but just not knowing the tools, not having the grace or authority to kind of open that side of me up as a lawyer, living as a should, thinking this is how lawyers do it, I'm doing it the right way. But until I started to pay attention to that cracking that was starting to happen to me as a lawyer, it wasn't until I went through that crack of ready to give it up and saying, oh, wait a minute, there are ways to practice law where you do look at the law, but you get to talk about that emotional piece, and you get, recognize the concerns and shame that happen around finances, and now treat the problem. And all of a sudden the light bulb went on, and it's just been a whole different way, and now to be able to sit with someone in loan modifications, now on the other side, not representing the banks, but working with debtors who are negotiating with banks and empowering them to give them the tools of how to speak that bank language, but also learning to help them navigate the shame that comes along with financial stress, and giving them tools and connecting them with people in the community to help them with that, so that when they do go to those negotiations, they're able to be present and speak the business terms and deal with the legal issues, because they get too intertwined in our system. And if you can empower your client with some tools and some knowledge and other people, like-minded professionals, all of a sudden that very tight conflict that seems impassable becomes completely manageable. Now I get to feel like a counselor of law again, and that makes it all worthwhile again.